Hey, welcome again to another installment of What's Willy Preaching. And today I want to go over the first of a series that I did a while back. This was on the book of Daniel, and this was the first sermon in that series. I want to kind of give you a quick rundown of what that sermon was about today. Daniel is an interesting guy. His name actually literally means God is my judge. And you think about that, well, Daniel was a righteous guy. Why did he need to be judged? But he was sent to captivity with the rest of the Jewish people in a time when God was judging the nation of Israel for sinning against him. And so that's why he was given that name. And you wonder, was Daniel's parents like maybe influenced by the prophet Jeremiah? Were they righteous people trying to follow after God? Or maybe they gave birth to Daniel on the way to Babylon. You know, maybe Daniel's mom was a slave that had been captured and she was pregnant, you know, or maybe they knew the judgment was coming. Any number of reasons why she might have gave Daniel that name. Or maybe sometimes people would go through traumatic events and then they would change their name. Maybe Daniel's name, he changes his name because he says, you know what, I don't want to be called, you know, whatever my name was originally. God's judged our people, and that's what I want to be known by. I mean, so there's any number of reasons why he could have had that name, but the interesting thing about it is his name shows us that God judges sin. And a lot of people think, well, you know, I can do whatever I want, and it's all relative. What's sin to me is not sin to you, and, you know, what's sin to you isn't sin to me. It doesn't matter what's sin to me and what's sin to you. What matters is what is sin to God. What does He say sin is? Because He created everything, and He designed everything to function in a certain way. And if we go against that, that would be the ultimate definition of sin. And so we want to know what's God's definition of sin and how do I avoid that, because I don't want to be in sin. Jeremiah 24 says, "For this is what the Lord says, I will send terror upon you and all your friends, and you will watch as they are slaughtered by the swords of the enemy. I will hand the people of Judah over to the king of Babylon, and he will take them captive to Babylon or run them through with a sword." Now, this prophecy was given sometime after 605 BC, and it came true in 597 BC. Now, if you're not a history buff, before Christ, everything goes backwards. So you start at the closest to us is 0, and then it goes backwards. So 597 is closer to us than 605. You know, it's almost 100 years apart. You know, or no. It's not almost 100 years apart. I got that wrong. It's almost like 10 years, 7 years apart or whatever. But he gives a prophecy and then they get condemned. I'm actually getting my prophets mixed up. I was thinking about Isaiah the prophet, and we're dealing with Jeremiah the prophet. But anyhow, Jeremiah gives this prophecy. Everybody was doing whatever they wanted to do. And he kept telling them, you got to turn. And the other prophets were saying, no, everything's going to be great. It's all going to be fine. God loves us. And Jeremiah's like, no, we're going to get punished. You need to turn. And they wouldn't. God judges sin. Daniel was part of the first wave of 3 waves of the Babylonian invasion. Babylon came in 3 different times and attacked Jerusalem and took people away to captivity. And it's a long haul. I'm going to show you a map. And on the map, they had to go from Jerusalem all the way up, basically through what was Assyria, down the Euphrates, and all the way down to Babylon. And this was a forced march. This wasn't like, let's hop in the car and take a trip. You know, they're actually hauling a long way to get there. And they had to walk probably the whole way. You know, the king and his guys got to ride chariots and camels and horses, but everybody else had to hoof it on foot. And plus you had, guards probably beating you along the way, move it, and I imagine a lot of people probably died on the way there. They were the victims of a war, and they were the people that lost. And they were also being punished by God. It wasn't a pretty picture. Daniel 1:1-2 says this: during the third year of King Jehoiakim's reign in Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. All right, so siege warfare was bad anyway. Typically a siege meant they were starving you out. So, and then the forced march came after that. The Lord gave him victory over King Jehoiakim in Judah and permitted him to take some of the sacred objects from the temple of God. Now, that verse says an awful lot, and we tend to gloss over it. First off, there's he besieged it. That's a time amount involved that a lot of times we just look at and go on to the next part. A siege can sometimes last for a year or two, so that it depends on how much food was stored in the city before it got under siege and how long it took for the food to run out. And that's really how a siege worked. So that could have taken some time. And then it says he got victory over King Jehoiakim of Judah. And that guy, King Jehoiakim, permitted him to take some of the sacred objects from the temple. Man, that's saying an awful lot too. Because the temple was the centerpiece of worship for the Hebrews. And even though they were following after other gods, that was their pride and joy. That was the temple. This was what Solomon built. And it showed, that they had a legitimate right to be there. And yet Nebuchadnezzar came in and took stuff that was supposed to be dedicated to God. So Nebuchadnezzar took them back to the land of Babylonia and placed them in the treasure house of his God. So he took them away from the true God, and he took them back to Babylonia and dedicated them to his false God. God judges sin. I got a picture too I'm going to show you. It's a reproduction of the temple of Marduk in Babylon. It wasn't a little building either. This was a big thing. And basically, in that time, Nebuchadnezzar was looking at it saying, my God was bigger than your God. Kind of like two kids on the playground saying, my dad can beat up your dad. Well, in this case, he's basically saying, my God beat up your God. But what the truth of the matter was, and Daniel knew this, was, no, your God didn't beat up my God. My God allowed us to be stopped, and he didn't protect us because we were evil, and we turned against him, and we deserved to be punished. And so that's what happened. God judges sin. That's what Daniel's name means. And when God's judgment falls, a lot of times righteous people are used as a witness to the unrighteous. Now, there are people out there today that will tell you, oh, God will never put you through any kind of hardship. Oh, God's going to protect you from everything bad. Oh, you don't ever have to worry about any of these things. Guess what? Those people are lying to you, because Daniel was a righteous person, and look what God did, allowed to happen to him. He allowed him to be taken captive and go through that whole forced march. He allowed him to have to go through that siege and be starved out. Now, here's what happened. They get to Babylon, and after this forced march, they're looking like ragged, beat up dogs or something. And the prince of the eunuchs has the task of saying, all right, I got to get you guys into shape. You need to eat, and you need to eat this food. And at that time, all meat was sacrificed to the god for his blessing. And then you ate the meat. And Daniel says, no, we're not going to eat the king's meat, and we're going to eat vegetables and fruit, and we're going to live off that. And in 10 days, if you're going to see that we're a whole lot healthier and better than all these other captives. And that's what they did. It says in 1:15. At the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends, that's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, looked healthier and better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned by the king. All right? God came through for Daniel. Daniel says, no, I'm going to stay true to God. I saw what happened. I heard what Prophet Jeremiah said, that we were going to be here for 70 years. I'm going to trust God, and I'm going to follow him, and I'm going to see God come through in this case. Now, when God's judgment falls, though, yes, he's going to use the righteous often as a witness to the unrighteous, but he also protects his righteous people a lot of times. So, you may have to go through hard things in your life. You might have a financial crisis. You may, and you were doing everything right, and you still went through the financial crisis. You may have a health condition, and you were doing everything right. You may have other things that come along in your life that you think are really, really scary, but God can use those things as a testimony to other people that he's judging. Maybe you go to the hospital and with your condition, the hypothetical condition, and you go in there and the guy next to you is in there because he lived a rotten life and he got the condition he's in, but God put him in the bed next to you so that you could witness to him. You just never know. God can turn bad things into good things all the time if you keep trusting him and keep following him. I'm preaching to myself here too. This is stuff we all need to know as Christians. Daniel 1:18 through 20 said this: when the training period ordered by the king was completed, the chief of staff brought all the young men to King Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked to them, and no one impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. I think that's how you pronounce it, as Azariah, yeah. So he was impressed by these guys. He looked at them and he said, yeah, you look healthiest. And they had not given in to eating the king's meat. They decided to eat the good stuff, the fruits and the vegetables, that, what we would call a Daniel fast. Some people claim that when Daniel was fasting later on, when Gabriel came to give him the vision, that was just a continuation of this fast, and that it's like the Daniel fast is the longest fast in the Bible, where Daniel just decided, I'm never going to eat meat here in Babylon because it's all sacrificed to idols. I don't know if that's true, but it does make a certain amount of sense, because back then meat was a rare commodity and it was a sign of excess and expense, and not everybody had it, and the meat often was sacrificed to idols, and so it would make sense that Daniel wouldn't eat that. So it's quite possible that is the longest fast recorded in the Bible. God uses and blesses his people, though, even when things get tough. I want you to look at this one. This is in Daniel 1:19 through 21. So they entered the royal service. Whenever the king consulted them in any matter regarding wisdom and balanced judgment, he found them 10 times more capable than any of the magicians and enchanters in his entire kingdom. Daniel remained in the royal service until the first year of the reign of King Cyrus. Now, I want to tell you about that. King Cyrus is the king who decreed that the Israelites could go back to Israel and they could leave Babylon and go back to establish the temple. He's the guy that told Ezra and Nehemiah, yes, you can go back. Now, Ezra and Nehemiah survived Cyrus, and they were under the reign of Artaxerxes years later, and they said, when the guys came back, they said, well, how are things going? And they're like, well, they're not going well. We're constantly under attack. And the walls of the city have been burned down, and we can't get the temple rebuilt. Well, that's where the book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah come in. And that was 70 years after this point. And it was prophesied by Jeremiah the prophet. And there were things that Daniel prophesied that came true. I mean, if you study Bible prophecy, you're going to find out that God, it's just so miraculous how these prophets come true. So that's where Cyrus falls into this picture. And Daniel served under these kings all that time. He had served, and he was more wise than the other magicians, more wise than the Chaldeans, more wise than their astrologers, time and time and time again. And some of these guys were proto-scientists, what we would call, I guess, proto-scientists. They were people who were truly trying to figure out how things worked. And some of them were just liars and enchanters. And some people do magic. Like, I've got a coin here, and if I take it like this, I make it disappear, right? But everybody knows that it's really over here in the other hand. But if you do it well enough, it's not there, and it's not there either. It's actually, in your ear or something. So it's like, I know it's kind of hard to see in a camera, but that's really an enchantment. It's a trick. It's a lie. It's not really something that is true. And so some of these guys ended up in the king's court because they could do these kind of things. But when the king had a really hard time, he would say, I need wisdom on this matter. And they'd be like, hey, you want to see a trick? You know? And but Daniel would say, this is what God has to say about that. And the king found them wise, and he got promoted, and he stayed in the king's service for a long time because he was a wise person, and he went through many, many, many different kings until finally the Jews were allowed to go back to Babylon. And chances are Daniel was probably, at that point in his 90s, because let's say he's probably 15, 16, early 20s maybe at this point, 70 years later, that's 70, 80, 90 years old. He was definitely an old dude by that time, and chances are he didn't go back to Babylon. But he remained faithful to God his whole life, and we can learn a lot about him. God judges sin. That's what his name means, and God does judge sin. Don't let sin rule your life. We need to encourage each other to stay as far away from sin as possible, to live a life that's pleasing to God. If you have sinned, though, and everybody has, whether you want to admit it or not, you've sinned, I've sinned, and we go to God and we say, Lord, please forgive me for my sins. I know that Jesus died on the cross to pay for that sin. All right? I know that sin requires really a death penalty because it separates me from you. But Jesus paid for that, and I trust him for that, and I thank him for that, and I'm going to try to live my life to please you. That's it. And then you just turn away and you follow after him all the days of your life. Read your Bible. Find a Bible-believing church. Get with other people that want to know God and follow him. Don't settle for phony Christianity. Get into the real stuff. Find people that are sold out, burning on fire for him, and learn everything you can about God and follow after him wholeheartedly. God bless you guys. I hope you have a good day, and we'll see you in the next video.